Hello and welcome to part 3 of how not to end up in hospital when you're taking off labels and supplements. So this is where I talk about actually what put me in hospital. Essentially, what happened is the first thing I remember from, well, actually potentially more than a day and a half, is walking up to a bed in the ward at nearly midnight, and everything that happened before that I have no recollection of, none at all. And the reason that I was there is because the doctors thought that I had had a stroke, and so I was on a stroke ward. Taking a step back, what actually happened was that I had been doing research, and because I haven't yet raised enough money for me to buy the glutamine antagonist recommended by Professor Siegfried, I don't have the money to do HBOT or intravenous high dose vitamin C. Essentially, I was looking at alternative ways of using things like pro-oxidatives and other off labels, so things like EGCG, which is known to act as a glutamine inhibitor. And I was trying to use that for that purpose. So what I did, now I use, see, it's the lights reflecting on it, is you can't see, but basically what it says on the front here is that it's concentrated green tea. It says 10,000 milligrams, but it's not. It's essentially 1,000 milligrams of EGCG, the active component. So that's 1 gram of green tea extract. Now, I decided to use this along with bembendazole and ivermectin at higher doses. So the fenbendazole, previously I was taking 444 milligrams, and I upped that to 2 tablets, 888. And this is not medical advice, by the way. I don't recommend you do this. I recommend you speak with medical professionals, you do your own research, you figure out what protocol is best for you. I'm not giving you medical advice here. This is just my experiences based on the research that I did. So I was up in the fenbendazole. I upped the albendazole as well, and I don't think either of those two were any part of the cause of the issue. I'd gone up to 80 milligrams twice a day of the ivermectin. Now, at those doses, there have been studies where 160 milligrams a day in a single dose have been used, and it's been found to be quite safe. There was even one study that I read about ivermectin where they talk about 600 micrograms per kilogram. So for me, I'm around 80 kilos. That would be 240 milligrams of ivermectin in a single dose. They only did that for a week, but I mean, they've tested it up to those levels and didn't find any major problems. Now, with ivermectin, and this is where the neurotoxicity comes in, ivermectin is known to, at high doses, cause some dizziness. It's known to cause you to be effectively unsteady on your feet, to lose some fine motor control, so you get more clumsy, knock things over, drop things, bump into things. And you can also find that you start using the wrong words, so that it's like a form of confusion. So the wrong words are being spoken, so you mean one word and you say another. A bit like you get with stroke. Now, the things that I didn't have, which were a good indicator that it wasn't a stroke, was I didn't have one side or the other of my face dropping. I wasn't losing any strength, or there was no weakness in my arms or my legs. In fact, for the most part, from what I'm told, because another side effect that I've found, and this is essentially the combination of high dose EGCG, so 1 gram of EGCG with 80 milligrams of ivermectin twice a day on 3 days a week. Another effect was short-term memory loss. And when the toxicity was at its highest, was literally just 3 days in. So I'd taken the 80 milligrams ivermectin, 1 gram EGCG at lunchtime with a meal and in the evening with a meal. Done the same again on Wednesday, and then Thursday I presume I must have taken the lunchtime tablets, I think, maybe a bit earlier than usual. I don't remember that day at all. I literally only remember 10 minutes of that day, the 10 minutes before midnight when I was walking up onto the ward. Apparently what happened was I was trying to make a coffee. I was using tablespoons to try and put the coffee in the mug, which I knocked over. And then I managed to make a coffee and then I spilt it down my front. And so at this point, obviously, Claire, my partner, she was getting really worried because this is not like me at all. I'm not clumsy. I don't, it's very rare for me to knock things over or spill things down me. Does happen on occasion. I'm only human, but this was like altogether, I was unsteady on my feet, bumping into things. And so she phoned the doctors. They told her, call emergency 999, get an ambulance. It was a suspected stroke as far as the symptoms that they'd been told about, as far as they were concerned. So I had a ride in an ambulance to A&E. I had several hour wait to get a CT scan. They may have done other tests, I'm not sure. I was asked if I needed a wheelchair, apparently, to be wheeled to the CT scan. I have no recollection of that. Apparently I walked to get the scan, got myself up on the bed, did the scan, went back to A&E, got the results, and after some more hours of waiting, I was taken up to the stroke ward. And say 10 to midnight is really the first recollection I have of that entire day. Now, Claire's told me quite a lot about what went on. She said at one point I got a bit aggressive, obviously, if I was fumbling and knocking things over and bumping into things. And she was saying things to me. I think it was verbal aggression. Thank God that's all it was. But because I'm not a violent person by nature. Although goodness knows I've been violent in the past, and I do have a bit of a checkered past on that. But a lot of self-help, a lot of work has got me over that. I'm a much calmer person these days, and so whilst I was less worried, I was more concerned that if any of the drugs that I was taking potentially changed my behaviour and actually did make me more aggressive. When she told me that was the first thing that crossed my mind. It's like, oh my God, what if I had hurt her? Because I'm much bigger than she is. I'm much stronger. She couldn't stop me. So that was a real concern for me. It's like, and the fact that I have no memory of any of that happening, that's an issue. I mean, I do not like that at all. I don't like that I have this big gap, of a minimum, probably a day, But there are other things that I've found since, like I was watching a program, and I'd been watching it for several days, and I'd probably been on a bit of a binge, just looking at what had been watched. And I had to go back several episodes before I found an episode that I actually remembered what happened in it. And so the effects of memory loss had actually started probably on the Monday when I started the higher doses of ivermectin and EGCG. So that's something that I'd heard about it talked about in terms of really high doses of ivermectin. But the reason that I'm talking about EGCG is basically because of the research that I did while I was in hospital. So Claire brought me, some clothes and toothbrush and toothpaste and my laptop and my phone and all the rest of it. Well, actually, I had my phone in my pocket. I think that was with me, but she brought chargers, all the stuff that just enough for a couple of nights because that's what we thought it was going to be. But it actually took 4 days before I actually got the MRI scan to just confirm that it wasn't a bleed on the brain. There was nothing actually wrong. It was all down to the neurotoxicity of combining the high doses of EGCG and the ivermectin. Now, if you look, let me show you. Let's turn it off. So I've basically just done a search on EGCG and ivermectin neurotoxicity. Now, when you go and you look through just Google results, you don't find anything really that prepares you for using those nutrients. They've not really been tested in that way. Now, the reason that I was using high doses of EGCG, so 1 gram tablets twice a day with ivermectin, because what I was actually trying to do was use the EGCG as a form of glutamine inhibitor, as I mentioned, and then all of the other drugs and off labels that I was taking have, because I was doing the keto diet as well, so I'm controlling the glucose. Now I'm trying to control the glutamine, and so instead of using the recommended glutamine antagonist, which is several £1,000s, I'd found, through my own research, that EGCG does inhibit the uptake of glutamine into cancer cells and normal cells. Not perhaps as effectively, not perhaps as maybe not in a way that completely shuts it down. But I figured something's better than nothing. And when you look through all of these Google results, there's really nothing there. There's only 5 pages, or 4 pages actually, that come up with results. So there's very, very few results. When you search for EGCG and ivermectin neurotoxicity, 36 results are all you basically get. Now, if you go to an AI, so I use Perplexity, I've got a pro account, so I can do lots of these searches and things. If you just do a basic search of EGCG and ivermectin neurotoxicity, you don't really get anything out because there's been no studies on it. And it wasn't until I started doing a much deeper dive on essentially EGCG and its potential effects and how it would interact with ivermectin. Essentially what I found is that whilst the ivermectin was the drug that was causing all of the symptoms, the EGCG actually increased the speed and the levels of neurotoxicity, I believe, because what I found is that, first of all, ivermectin, the efficacy of it is increased when you're on a high-fat diet. So when you have a high-fat diet and you take ivermectin, it can be up to 2.5 times more effective than just taking ivermectin on its own on let's say, a standard American diet. What the EGCG was doing was effectively allowing more of the ivermectin to cross the blood-brain barrier. And so that's essentially why I think the speed of what happened, literally, it was over 3 days, but it was effectively 4 doses. So a lunchtime and an evening meal twice, once on the Monday, once on the Wednesday, and possibly another dose, maybe a fifth dose on the Thursday. I do not know if I took a dose of ivermectin and EGCG on the Thursday. The likelihood is that I did, but I don't know for sure, and Claire doesn't know. So the reason that I believe that is that the effective half-life of EGCG in the body is around 6 hours. The build-up of the ivermectin actually crossing into the brain, so it was getting into my brain far more than it should have been. By being allowed, it was essentially being transported across the blood-brain barrier by the EGCG. As far as I can tell from my research, bearing in mind that this hasn't really been tested in the real world. And by midnight, the toxicity had worn off enough, because obviously I didn't take the evening dose. I was sitting in A&E, either getting a scan or waiting for a scan or waiting for the results. I don't know exactly what time I had that. So yeah, 10 to midnight is essentially the first memory I have, and it's literally me walking onto the ward in the Lister and saying, like, there's your bed. So I got my bag down, and then I remember waking up in the morning, speaking with the occupational therapist. They were doing all of the tests that they do to find out how badly somebody who's just had a stroke has been affected. So I'd had the CT scan at this point, obviously, that was the night before in A&E, but I hadn't had the MRI yet. And I think the MRI took 4 days for me to get, because the testings that I did with the occupational therapists literally revealed nothing. It was just like picking a random, normal, healthy person off the street, sticking them in a stroke bed, and then testing them to see if they'd had a stroke, because everything had worn off. I'd had a reasonable night's sleep. I mean, I was up quite late, getting used to all of the beeping and the noise of the nurses and the snoring of 2 other guys in other beds. There's five guys in a ward. So I eventually got some sleep, maybe 4 or 5 hours, but I hadn't taken any more of the ivermectin or the EGCG. The toxicity was coming down. The EGCG had literally worn off the previous day while I was in A&E, which is probably why I was able to walk to the scan without falling over or looking drunk, or even by that time. I mean, I was talking with Claire. I found an email that I'd sent on my phone, and when I read it back, I don't remember sending it, but it was fully coherent. It was an email that I would send. And so the effects were clearly starting to wear off in the evening, because I sent the email late afternoon, so early evening. By the time I got to the ward, had a good night's sleep, and then got the test done by the occupational therapist, I was practically back to normal. I literally, if they'd have done the MRI scan right then, I wouldn't have been sent home, but they would have seen that nothing more to see here as far as a stroke was concerned, so possibly could have been moved off to another ward. Maybe wouldn't have been, but I don't know what would have happened at that point. But it effectively took 4 days, and I think it took 4 days was because they literally could find no sign of stroke. I had no weakness. I was at full strength. I was fully cognizant, able to hold a conversation. There was no slurring of my speech. I was steady on my feet, walking backwards and forth to the toilet. It was only 20 meters away, but I mean, you could see just by walking up and down the corridor, I hadn't had a stroke. I mean, it was just, there was no chance. And that was when I started looking for the reasons why, and came across, with the AI, the possibility that EGCG combined with the higher doses of ivermectin was actually going to be the culprit. And when I finally got the MRI scan and it came back clear, as we expected, I'd already done a full assessment with the occupational therapists, and they essentially sort of cleared me on everything. So short-term memory, medium-term memory, being able to do tasks with paper, drawing things, remembering what things look like, all of the tests that they do for stroke. It was like 100%, absolutely no concerns whatsoever. Apart from one thing, was I didn't know what the date was. But I never know what the date is. If I want to know what the date is, it's right there in the corner of my computer, or I just turn the screen of my phone on and it's right there in front of me. If I need the date, that's where I get it from. So that was the only thing, so she did a little test. She said, well, if 3 days ago it was the 8th, then, what would the day be the date be today? And so, okay, so it's, whatever the day was, I don't remember now. But literally all of the effects came down to the ivermectin, but in conjunction with EGCG. Now, this is the thing that I've never heard anybody talk about. Now, I was using the EGCG in a way that it was probably never intended to be used. Like I say, trying to use it as a glutamine inhibitor seemed like a fantastic idea at the time, but with those side effects, it is like, I mean, there is a minimum, I would suggest, of at least a day and a half, potentially 2 days, that I really don't remember anything about. And I know that it started before that based on some programs that I have no memory of watching, but I can see that I had watched. And so, let me bring this back up to, because I've left it on the screen there, a bit too long. But yeah, the whole episode of potentially thinking that initially that I'd had a stroke, and then that it was like, well, I don't feel any different. I don't feel any weakness. I can hold a conversation. And of course, there were, all the guys in the beds next to me actually had strokes, even if they were very small ones, and they weren't the big life-changing, debilitating strokes where you have to fully rehabilitate because they can't move their arm, they can't move their leg, face is dropped on one side. There wasn't anything quite as severe as that, but you could clearly see that these guys had strokes. They were struggling. One guy couldn't get out of bed, and I think a couple of the guys had falls, because obviously when you have a stroke, you can't control your limbs properly, you get a bit of weakness, falling over is a big risk, and at least a couple of the guys certainly had. And so I felt a bit like a fraud sitting in there. It's like, well, just get me the MRI. But I think possibly what happened is because I'd done so well in all the tests, I was just like bumped to the back of the queue. It's like, this guy's not a priority. It's like, if we've got other people that need the MRI, bump him, because we don't think we're going to find anything. We obviously need to check at some point. But so I mean, 5 nights in a ward with machines beeping and people snoring, and after 4 nights of just a couple of hours sleep a night, that is, I mean, sleep deprivation is essentially a form of torture, and I really start to feel it when I'd been there, like for the 5th day. And when I was released, the doctor actually said to me, "We've got your MRI back. It looks perfectly normal. It's completely clear. The CT was clear. Everything else was clear. But we're not sure we can let you go home. And the reason being is because they didn't know what had caused the symptoms of me presenting as essentially a stroke victim. Had I not done the research myself, had I known what most likely had caused those symptoms, I would have been in hospital for probably another 2 or 3 days, because they would have been looking for infections on the brain, viruses, bacteria, you know, all sorts of things, and all of those tests would have been 100% a complete waste of time, because I'd figured out what had caused it. With the high-fat diet, the higher doses of ivermectin, and what I think were the complementary effects of the EGCG, essentially shuttling the ivermectin across the blood-brain barrier, which, the research that I did suggested that was a good possibility that was happening, and therefore further increasing the levels of toxicity that I was getting from the ivermectin. It basically meant that just within those 3 days, those 4 doses of ivermectin EGCG, that the toxicity in the brain had got to such a point that it just presented as all those stroke-like symptoms. And so that's what I would warn you about, is whatever medication you're taking, if you're taking it at even safe therapeutic levels, you really need to do as much research as you can on how they might interact with each other. And while I'd seen that it was a possibility that ivermectin at really high doses, like the 240, I was nowhere near that. I was half of that dose. And the 120 they talked about in the trials was a single dose daily. And I was splitting that dose. I was doing 160, slightly higher than the 120, but I was doing that over 2 doses, 6-7 hours apart, with lunch and dinner. But I was doing it with the high dose of EGCG, and that caused a 6 day, essentially 5 nights, 6 days in hospital that were unnecessary. And obviously I never want to have to go through that again. So now my protocol, as you saw on the Excel sort of spreadsheet, is you can see that the EGCG is up here first thing in the morning, when I wake up, and the ivermectin and the other off labels are with dinner in the evening. And so they are separated by 8, 9, 10 hours potentially, because I never want to see any kind of effects like that again, because that was just madness. Having memory loss, bumping into things, mixing up words. And so any drugs now that I consider adding to my protocol, I have to research really what is the biggest downside potentially of this drug, and could another drug, and in particular things like EGCG, where, and again, I'd urge you to go and look up KCP for this sort of deep dive into EGCG and all of its myriad of pathways that it affects, because it tackles so many different areas, and particularly in relation to cancer, that it really is worth a watch. So yeah, I mean, we're up to about half an hour on this video now. It's sort of me giving you some in-depth insight into what put me in hospital, what the symptoms were, and essentially how, if the hospital don't understand why you've been admitted to hospital, particularly if the symptoms seem at first glance to be relatively severe. And like I say, spilling things down me, bumping into doors, walls, not being steady on my feet, mixing up my words. And at the time, I was completely unaware of the effect of the short-term memory. None of that was anything that I had anticipated based on the research that I'd done, because the research says that the high doses of ivermectin, the bigger causes of concern for off labels are liver damage, potentially kidney damage, and then at really, really high doses like the 240 in a single dose, potentially those symptoms start to become. But because of the ECGC, like I say, I think that just changed the game. And being on the high fat diet, increasing the effects of the ivermectin, getting more of it across the blood-brain barrier, that was just enough in a very short space of time, just a few days, 4 or 5 doses tops at those levels. And I wasn't in control of myself. I don't remember a lot of what happened. I certainly don't remember walking to get a CT scan. I certainly don't remember sitting in A&E for several hours with Claire, and apparently I was asking her to get me lots of coffees from those. You get those tiny cups from the vending machines, little plastic cups. I mean, I don't even remember what that tasted like. I'm sure it was awful, and I probably wouldn't have been asking for it if I'd remembered that I'd had one before. But maybe I wasn't remembering that I'd just had a coffee and saying, "Can you get me a coffee?" Because I was thirsty. So yeah, I mean, please, please, please do as much research as you possibly can. Use the AIs; they're getting better and better and better. I use Perplexity. I have used Claused. I've used ChatGPT 5. They're all good in their own ways. I like Perplexity. I use the Pro on that because I can use the different AIs all through a single plan. So, and I do a lot of research, and anything for any supplement that I'm looking at, I will dive into what are the possible effects, what could it interact with, look at worst case scenarios, because now I know that those are a real possibility, and I do not want to spend another nearly a week in hospital through a mishap of dosages, or putting two things close together that have an enhancing effect. So because EGCG can effectively transport things across the blood-brain barrier, you might say that could double the effectiveness of it. But with the high-fat diet being 2.5 times the effectiveness of ivermectin, goodness knows what kind of levels were running around my body. Were in places in my brain that they never should have been. So yeah, I mean, just a warning to everybody that just do as much research as you can, and try to find what would be the biggest downside and then protect against it. So like I say, having a pill box, I never had one of these before, but it's even possible that I could have taken pills at lunchtime before I did my dinner, and then forgotten that I'd taken them and had some more. I don't know. I don't know if that happened, but it possibly could have, because now that I know that my memory was affected, it's like, at least if they're in pill boxes and I go to grab a lunchtime dose of pills and they're not there, it's like, oh, I don't remember taking those. Did I take these? Did you see me take these? Oh, I must have. They're not there. All of the rest of the pills are in the box. So this is why, and I'm also talking more with Claire now about what doses I'm taking, how I'm feeling. Do I get? I mean, Bernardo, the guy that started the Cancer Warrior group, he said a couple of days before I was admitted to hospital, I messaged him to say that I felt dizzy when I got up. I don't remember sending that message. I don't remember having that conversation, but I go back and I look at my messages and it's there. So clearly I was affected, but just wasn't fully aware of it. So you need the people around you to help you with your protocol as well, particularly if things like neurotoxicity in the brain are a possibility, because it could present as something else and you go down a completely different journey than the one you intended. And yeah, I mean, it wasn't a fun experience at all. I mean, don't get me wrong, the doctors, the nurses, the other patients in the hospital, they were all lovely, but being in hospital is a nightmare. Getting more than a couple of hours sleep at any one go, really, really, really difficult. I've got these over here headphones, and I was doing the white noise and the tones and all sorts, just to block out the machines. They constantly bleep every 3 or 4 seconds, and you've got 2 or 3 of those going off, and people snoring. It's impossible to get any sleep until you get so exhausted that you just conk out, and that's not natural sleep. So yeah, I mean, if you can avoid that journey, please by all means do all the research you can to avoid that journey. So I'll leave that there. I will do a couple more episodes on this. I'll carry on talking about some of the experiences and some of the things that happened, and more of the research. But I mean, this effectively, you could stop here, because this is effectively the part where doing more research, checking all the off labels, the supplements that you take and their interactions, and testing and titrating are all super, super important, especially when you're getting up to therapeutic levels for anti-cancer purposes, for me using for my protocol, my personal plan that I've developed out of my research. So I recommend everybody does the same, but where you can, also talk to medical professionals about it. I mean, most of the medical professional advice that I'm getting is literally through white papers and studies, and using AI to interpret those. So do as much of that as you can, but if you can get a real medical professional that's got real experience, definitely try and do that too. So thank you for watching. Please do be careful if you are using metabolic therapy, off labels and supplements. Do all the research you can, and come join us in Cancer Warriors on School if you have questions of your own, if the things that you're not sure about, because like I say, there's over 400 people in that group. We're all doing similar things, but not exactly the same, for various different reasons, different types of cancers, different level of funding available. Oh, actually, one more thing, just one last thing that I just want to show you. So this is something that's just been posted in school. So in the Cancer Warriors group, it's essentially, this has to be taken as a anecdotal story, because it's a very, very broad outline. There's no specifics, there's no timings, there's no doses. All it says is a 15-week combination therapeutic ketogenic diet with high dose vitamin C infusions, moderate exercise, repurposed drugs, and this guy was cured, according to the story, of stage 4 cancer in less than 4 months. Which again, it's another story. There are a number of them out there, but this author molecular medicine, which is the paper that I think this has been based off of. I haven't gone through this yet because, as you can see, I mean, Stuart literally only posted this a couple of hours ago, and I was preparing to create this video. But this is the kind of thing that I would love to see more of. I would love to see more details. I mean, I know it's difficult for people because when we start putting out exact doses and timings and things like this, we have to keep giving people warnings that it's not medical advice. It's not something that we recommend they do without doing their own research, without talking to their oncologists and their doctors and their professors, because all of this is experimental. We are essentially devising our own protocols and experimenting on ourselves with or without the help of other people. Some people I know are doing it completely on their own, others are doing it with doctors. I've spoken to my professors about it, I've spoken to my oncologists about it. They weren't super helpful, but some doctors, they will give away, they have looked into this, and they are medical professionals and they do know stuff about, I've been given some tips about potential red cell count, like anemia that can come about of high doses of EGCG as well. And it's like, he didn't have to give me that. It's something that I've already looked into, all the downsides of high doses of EGCG, but these doctors, they don't have to give that. It's not something that they're really allowed to give. It's certainly not in the NHS advice on these kinds of plans. But essentially, a lot of the information we're getting are from things like this. It's like people saying that they've come in, they've got stage 4 cancer, they do the protocol, they do the high dose vitamin C and the ivermectin and the femben, and they do some exercise, and there's some other things in there, so zinc, magnesium, potassium. I take D3 and K2. I take 6,000 IUs of that a day, so right up into the therapeutic range of that. But the zinc, magnesium, and potassium, the vitamin D, K2, who knows what levels of supplements they were taking? Were they high dose therapeutic, or were they just normal daily doses that you would buy? I mean, I say over the counter. I mean, I buy even the 5,000 IU tablet that I've got is an over the counter. I just bought it off of Amazon. But yeah, I mean, the problem with these stories is that obviously we don't get the full story. We don't get all of the details, all of the timings, all of the doses. And so it has to be treated as an anecdotal story. However, if true, and I have no reason to believe that it's not, in less than 4 months, from stage 4 cancer to no signs of disease, I mean, that is incredible. And it's like, why can't I just get that prescribed on the NHS? If they can do that for a stage 4 cancer guy, I mean, and when you look, you can see here they're talking about all of the various cancers that he had. I did see on there somewhere. Bones, spine, lymph nodes, all organs were all clear of cancer. So I'm assuming he had cancer in all of those places when he had the stage 4 cancer, because that's essentially what stage 4 cancer is. It just spreads all around the body. And so this guy Kramer has basically said this was a godsend after beating what I was told was an unbeatable or an untreatable disease. And he would have been getting the full, sort of palliative care speech at that point. Go home, make memories, do what you can, because there's nothing more we can do. You've got, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever it is they told him. And then he goes and cures himself of cancer in less than 4 months. I mean, you just can't make it up. You just can't make it up. So, yeah, I mean, for me, it's kind of like, all the time there are people that are getting these kinds of results. I'm going to keep trying to replicate that for myself. And yeah, I mean, if you are looking for more information about that, metabolictherapy.com, school.com with a K, // cancer warriors. And like I say, there's loads of us in there that are talking about this stuff all the time. So as you just saw, these kinds of stories are really what inspire us to keep doing what we're doing, keep researching, keep taking the pills, keep doing the ketogenic diet, and hopefully in time will be no evidence of disease as well. So I really will wrap it up there now. That was an extra 15 minutes that I hadn't really planned for, but I do like to talk, give you as much information as I can, give you as much context as I can, and just show you that this stuff isn't being made up. This is not make believe. This is based on real science. This is based on real people's lives, real stories of people getting results. And we just want to see much more of that. We don't want to hear about people losing their battles with stage 4 cancers. We want people to be able to come and find the information they need, put it into practice, and get results. We can't do that with advice, we can't do that with prescriptions, but we can certainly do that with education. So that's what we're doing. We're just trying to put as much information out there as we can that people can pick out the bits that are relevant to them, and then they'll be able to go and hopefully, with the help of their medical professionals, devise something like that where you get from stage 4 cancer to nothing in less than 4 months. So I'll leave it there. Enjoy the rest of your day. I hope you found this of interest and inspiring and really helpful. And I hope my sort of stay in hospital and the lessons that I learned from it are something that you can take away and apply to whatever it is that you're doing. So, goodbye, take care, and I'll see you in the next update.